In the corner of the old cemetery, a mother knelt beside her child's grave, clutching a framed photo and a withered bouquet of dandelions. No one came. The cold headstone marked a death labeled as an accident, but the mother's eyes had never believed it, until a strange man placed a white lily on the wrong grave, and inadvertently touched a secret that had been buried for far too long. In that moment, the truth began to awaken. Evening fell quickly, the late autumn wind carrying a silent chill that enveloped the yellowed blades of grass in the small cemetery south of the city. The bare branches of the trees stood motionless, as if mourning someone. On a simple plot, amidst rows of moss-covered headstones, a woman knelt, her brown hair falling around her shoulders, her body trembling. Ava, 35, ignored the biting cold that seeped into her fingertips. She held a small framed photo and a bouquet of wildflowers tightly to her chest, her eyes fixed on the simple stone engraved with the words, "Lucas Alexander, forever loved, 2013 to 2023. The tears no longer flowed as they had in the early days, but the feeling of agonizing pain remained, like a dagger plunged into her heart. It had been 3 months since Lucas, her only child, her everything, had passed away forever after a sudden accident, according to the investigators' conclusion. Ava gently kissed the framed photo, where Lucas's angelic smile still shone brightly, defying all the pain she was carrying. "Are you cold, Lucas? Today, Mom brought dandelions, just like you liked." She spoke softly, her voice choked, and placed the bouquet on the cold ground. Right next to Lucas's grave was another, larger one, covered in white flowers and meticulously cared for. The marble headstone was polished and gleaming, clearly engraved. Elliot Nathaniel, An Angel Who Never Leaves, 2005-2018. Eva had never paid attention to that grave until today. The sound of a luxury car stopping on the small road leading into the cemetery made Eva turn her head slightly. A man stepped out of the car, tall, elegant, with silvering hair, though he still appeared dignified. He walked toward the grave next door, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. It was Nathaniel, the chairman of a renowned real estate corporation, one of the most powerful and discreet people in the city. No one knew he had a child's grave here, so quiet and unassuming. Nathaniel stood silently before his son's grave for a moment, his eyes unable to hide his sadness and distant gaze. He placed the flowers and closed his eyes briefly. But then, a choked sound pulled him from his thoughts. Eva's crying. He turned, and in that instant, their eyes met. No one spoke. Only a prolonged silence stretched between two immeasurable losses. Eva quickly wiped away her tears, nodding slightly as an apology for disturbing him, then turned back to Lucas's grave. Nathaniel didn't leave immediately. He observed the gaunt woman, her face etched with hardship, and then, unexpectedly, in an inexplicable gesture, he bent down, took a single lily from his bouquet, stepped lightly over to Lucas's grave, and placed it down. Without a word, without a glance. But Eva witnessed everything. Nathaniel left as he had arrived, quietly and mysteriously. In the distance, in the dappled shadows of the sunset, Father Samuel stood silently beneath an ancient oak tree, holding a Bible, his eyes watching the two people, as if witnessing something he had felt for a long time. He sighed and clasped his hands in prayer. That evening, Eva's small rented room was bathed in the dim light of a flickering lamp. She sat at an old wooden table, turning the pages in Lucas's old notebook, the only thing she held onto tightly whenever she missed her son. Only now, after his death, did she have the courage to touch the keepsakes Lucas left behind. Lucas loved to draw, loved to write random things. Inside the notebook were clumsy letters, childish drawings, and also some heartfelt words that made her heart ache. Page 12. The scrawled words made Eva freeze. There's a strange woman who comes to the house. Dad said not to tell Mom. Eva clutched the notebook tightly, her heart pounding. She turned to the next page. I think Dad has a secret. He got angry when I asked about the room in the basement that day. Lucas's father, Thomas, had left after their son's death, abandoning Eva with a pain that hadn't yet subsided. He left without an explanation. But Eva didn't care much, because if Lucas wasn't by her side, everything else didn't matter to her anymore. Eva's hand trembled as she touched each line. Lucas, her innocent boy, had seen something, had been afraid of something, and perhaps he had taken a secret to his grave. The room seemed to darken. The wind whistled through the window cracks like a mournful sigh. Eva sat motionless, her mind filled with questions. The next afternoon, Nathaniel returned to the cemetery, not out of habit, but because of something quietly compelling him. The feeling of seeing the woman from yesterday, kneeling by her son's grave, eyes full of tears but shining with endurance. It made his heart ache, a pain that wasn't loud, but seeped deep, like a cold mist covering his skin. The cemetery was deserted, the air carrying the scent of damp earth. Nathaniel stood still for a moment before his son's grave. Elliot then walked slowly toward the old oak tree, where a familiar man was sitting quietly reading the Bible. Father Samuel, he said, his voice deep and powerful. The priest looked up, his kind eyes behind thin glasses showing slight surprise. Nathaniel, I knew you would come back. Do you know who the woman from yesterday is? Nathaniel asked, not hiding his concern. Samuel closed the book and looked toward Lucas's grave. After a moment, he slowly replied, Her name is Eva. She lost her son 3 months ago. Since then, she has come here every week, alone. Never missed a week. Nathaniel looked toward the small grave, nodding slightly. Does she have any relatives? Number no parents, no siblings, no friends. Poor and resilient. But I have never seen her ask for help. What about her husband? Nathaniel asked, his voice deepening. Father Samuel was silent for a moment, then replied with some hesitation, That man has never come. Not once. Silence fell again, only the sound of the wind blowing through the old branches of the trees. Nathaniel said nothing more, but in his heart something began to stir, like a small needle pricking the old shell that he thought had turned to stone since his son's death. At the same time, in another part of the city, the tiny rented room of Eva suddenly echoed with loud knocks on the door. Eva opened the door, and immediately the face of Carlotta, her mother-in-law, appeared, her eyes full of spiteful hatred. Finally, you decided to open the door. Her voice rang like a whip. Without waiting for Eva to invite her in, she barged into the room, stepping on the old rug, her eyes looking around with contempt. The room was neat, but cramped. Nothing of value, except the framed photo of Lucas, placed neatly on the small altar. Eva was silent, her hands clenched. I didn't expect you to be so miserable after leaving my family. Then she continued, her voice bitter, If you weren't so incompetent, he wouldn't have died. You couldn't even keep your own child safe, and you have embarrassed our entire family. Each word was like a dagger stabbing Eva's chest. But she did not resist. She just stepped forward, gently hugging the framed photo of Lucas to her chest, as if his presence was the only thing enough for her to endure all these vile words. Carlotta looked at that scene, even angrier. You think hugging that photo will make you forgiven. It was right for Thomas to leave. As for you, you should have gone with your son a long time ago. A shiver ran down Eva's spine. But she remained silent. Only her eyes red but not defeated, looked directly at her mother-in-law with an almost painful resilience. Then she said resolutely, "If you only came here to insult me, then please leave." Carlotta couldn't stand that look. She grabbed her purse, threw a contemptuous look, and left, slamming the door hard behind her, not forgetting to utter another harsh sentence, "You useless woman." But Eva didn't bother to reply. The room returned to silence, but Eva's heart did not. Late that night, Eva put on her coat, holding a small bag, and quietly walked to the school where Lucas used to study, an old semi-private school where only struggling middle-class families like hers could afford to send their children. She knocked on the principal's office door and was led in with hesitation. Miss Sophia, who had been very fond of Lucas, secretly looked at her from afar with worried eyes. The principal, a large, stern man, sat behind a large wooden desk. "I'm sorry, I didn't make an appointment," Eva said, her voice soft. "I want to review the security camera footage of the last day Lucas came to school. The boy left behind some lines that make me very worried." The principal frowned and shook his head slightly. "We have checked everything, but unfortunately, the camera system was down that day. No recordings were saved." Eva froze. Not a single clip, not a single camera working. "We asked a technician to check it, an unexpected incident. You should let things rest. Don't dig too deep. I just want to know what happened to my son. Why he fell like that." Her voice choked. "Was there anyone who entered the school that day?" "There was nothing unusual, Mrs. Eva. And please, let your son rest in peace." Eva walked out of the room with wobbly legs. Sophia ran after her, handing her a small piece of paper. "I don't know if it will help, but that day Lucas talked to a stranger in the back hallway. I already reported it, but no one investigated further." Eva's fingers tightened around the piece of paper. Once again, the old feeling of unease returned, this time clearer, colder. Returning to her small room, Eva spread the piece of paper on the table. On it was Sophia's handwriting hastily written. A woman wearing white with long black hair. Not a teacher, not a familiar parent. She had been there once before, and Lucas seemed scared. Eva looked at the words, her whole body breaking out in goosebumps. Lucas had mentioned the strange woman. The pieces were gradually emerging, but the more they came together, the darker it became, making her feel. She was too close to something very real, very painful, and very dangerous. The morning in the city sluggishly passed in pale streaks of sunlight. In the old neighborhood with deserted shops, a tiny thrift store nestled between two buildings with peeling paint. The shop displayed old items, oil lamps, clocks, cameras, even wedding rings tarnished by time. The space had a heavy smell of dust, mixed with a touch of invisible sorrow. Eva entered, clutching a vintage men's watch, the only thing she had left from Thomas. The watch had been a wedding gift. Now she had to sell it to pay for a few more days of rent. The shop owner looked at the item and nodded slightly. 400. His voice was even, without emotion. Eva hesitated. It's Swiss-made, mechanical, still working well. In this day and age, who still buys these to wear? I'm just buying it for display. Take it or leave it. He shrugged, not finishing the sentence. Eva bit her lip, about to agree, when a warm, deep voice rang out from behind. I'll pay 600, but let her keep it. She turned. It was him, the man in the elegant grey suit, silvering hair, stern, but not cold eyes. Nathaniel. Surprise flashed across Eva's eyes, quickly replaced by wariness. You are the one who put the flower on Lucas's grave, she said softly, as an affirmation. Nathaniel nodded slightly, stepping closer, as if not wanting to overwhelm, but simply to be present. "I apologize for making you uncomfortable. It's just that day I saw—" Eva interrupted, her eyes calm but defensive. "It's okay. I'm used to people looking at me as something to be pitied." She took the watch from the seller's hand, then looked at Nathaniel. "Thank you for your kindness, but I don't need it." Nathaniel was silent for a moment. "I didn't come here out of pity. I lost a son, and I understand the feeling of having nothing left to lose." His words touched a corner in Eva's heart, a corner she tried to hide, lonely and wounded. But she still stood tall, her voice firm. "Then you also understand. When you hit rock bottom, the only thing you learn is not to expect anything from others." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes slightly sad. He didn't insist. He just left a business card on the counter and said gently, "If one day you need someone to listen to you, just listen. I'll be there." He left, leaving behind a quiet emptiness. Eva looked at the business card, not picking it up, just looking, as if considering whether for the first time in months she should trust someone again. Meanwhile, at Lucas's old school, the introduction ceremony for the new sponsor was held simply in the hall. The principal smiled, clapping his hands and leading a woman in a white dress onto the stage. Miranda, with sharp beauty, long black hair, red lips, and the confident gait of a woman who knows her worth. She smiled, waving lightly like a star entering the spotlight. Ms. Sophia, standing at the back of the hall, suddenly froze. Something was very strange. Her eyes widened as Miranda turned slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching. Those eyes. She had seen them before. In Sophia's memory were the clumsy drawings in Lucas's notebook, the picture the boy drew of the woman in white, long hair, eyes that look like they want to swallow me. And more than that, she had seen this woman at school, her appearance unmistakable, appearing on the very day that Lucas fell down the stairs. Sophia's heart beat strongly. She stepped back, pulled out her phone, and searched for the photo of the notebook pages. And then her heart sank as she realized it was her. No mistake. Miranda, the woman in Lucas's memory. Night fell like a dark curtain. Ava's small rented room, which was quiet, was suddenly filled with urgent knocks on the door. She opened the door. Sophia stood there, panting, holding a small backpack and a file. "I need to tell you what Lucas used to say," Sophia almost blurted out, her voice lost because of nervousness. Eva panicked. "Miss Sophia, what's wrong?" "I know something is wrong, but today I saw that person, right at school. I'm sure Lucas mentioned her." She pulled out a copy of some diary pages that she had secretly photographed. "Sometimes, the woman in white asks me very strange questions. She asks if I'm often home alone. She asks if I like to go down to the basement to play. I don't dare tell Mom, because Dad gets angry when I tell her, but I don't like her. Her eyes look like they want to swallow me." Eva was speechless, her eyes fixed on her son's words. Her voice trembled slightly. "That woman, does she have a name?" Sophia nodded, shakingly opening her phone, showing Eva a picture of Miranda standing next to the principal. "Her name is Miranda. She's the new sponsor." The room suddenly turned cold, not because of the wind, but because the truth was gradually taking shape, like a ghost, weighing heavily on Ava's chest. Miranda, Alonso's mistress. She had known that since Lucas was alive, but she hadn't bothered to expose it. The person Lucas was afraid of. The person Sophia had just seen at school, as if she had returned to check whether the secret had died with Lucas or not. Eva collapsed, holding her head. For the first time in 3 months, the pain in her wasn't just grief. but fear. Night in the rented neighborhood was silent, as if the whole world had retreated behind the rusty iron gates. The dim yellow light cast shadows on Ava and Sophia as they sat facing each other in a room that suddenly became a place to reveal secrets. Lucas's old notebook lay open on the table, open to pages wrinkled by tears and time. The wobbly, childish writing, but carrying the uneasy understanding of a child who grew up faster than their age. I hear whispering in the basement, but when I open the door, it's locked. Dad says it's an old, unsafe place, but I see light. The woman that day smelled good. Her perfume made me dizzy. She smiled, but I didn't like that smile. I saw Dad kiss her when Mum wasn't home. I don't dare tell anyone. I just draw in this notebook. If one day I disappear, then Mum, don't believe Dad. Eva read that, her hand shaking. She clutched the edge of the notebook, as if trying to hold on to Lucas's image, as if wanting to shake her son awake from the grave and ask, "What did you see? What did you know that made people silence you?" Sophia sat opposite her, tears falling silently, her voice choked. That day, Lucas seemed different. I saw the baby stagger a little when walking. I thought he was tired because of the weekend class. Then the next day, I heard that he had died. The principal said it was an accident, falling down the stairs. She sobbed, her eyes filled with tears, as if she herself was caught up in a feeling of guilt that she couldn't wash away. But now, I'm not sure anymore, Ava. I think Lucas didn't fall on his own. The room became cold, not because of the wind, but because the truth began to speak in pieces. Ava didn't answer. She just quietly gathered all the papers, the copies, stuffed them into a cloth bag, as if collecting the stolen parts of her son's soul. Meanwhile, elsewhere, on the top floor of a private hospital, Nathaniel was entering the office of forensic doctor Emilia Ortega. The woman in her 40s, sharp and calm, looked up when she saw him. "Mr. Nathaniel, I heard you wanted to ask about the forensic file of a boy. Lucas Alexander, 10 years old, died 3 months ago." Dr. Emilia paused slightly, then opened her computer. Her fingers glided quickly on the keyboard, but then stopped. A strange notification appeared on the screen. "What's wrong?" Nathaniel asked, his voice lowering. "This file has been sealed by a lawyer named Esteban Rios. There's an internal lock code. I can't open it without a special order." "Esteban Rios." He repeated the name as if he had just heard an alarm bell. "Whose private lawyer?" Emilia glanced at him, then said softly, "He used to be the lawyer representing the Alonso Vega family." Nathaniel froze. The Vega family? Ava's husband. He stood up, his eyes sharpening. "I will have someone access this file in another way. Thank you, Emilia. Don't tell anyone about today's conversation." Leaving the hospital, Nathaniel immediately called his private associate, a private investigator specializing in handling locked files. "I need you to open a forensic file. Name, Lucas Alexander. All information related to Esteban Rios. Dig to the root." For the first time in many years, Nathaniel's heart was pounding, not because of pain, but because of anger. The silence of death wasn't as scary as the quiet created by money and power. And he knew that the boy's death was not accidental. That night, Eva was dozing off when there was a rough knock on the door. She woke up, worried because it was late. But when she opened the door, Nathaniel was standing there, holding a file, his face tense. Eva was stunned. Before she could ask, he spoke, this time without hesitation. "I need to be frank. Not as someone who has lost a child, but as someone who is pursuing the truth. Eva looked at him, a hint of wariness in her eyes. But Nathaniel didn't wait for her to agree. "I am sure that your son's death was not simply an accident." Those words rang out, slowly, like each hammer blow hitting the emotional fortress that Eva had tried to build all this time. "So, what do you think killed my boy?" she whispered. "Somehow, I don't know yet. But I just found out that Lucas's forensic file was sealed by a lawyer who has direct contact with your husband. No ordinary child's death file is kept confidential at that level." Nathaniel gave her a photocopy, information about Esteban Rios, along with a seal signed by someone in the city's judicial system. Someone was covering something up. Eva slumped into a chair. She clutched the file. The pain of the day she lost her son seemed to return, this time not as a heart-wrenching pain, but as a fire rising from things that had never been spoken. I suspected. I used to think Thomas knew something, but he left, abandoned me." Nathaniel was silent. Then he sat down next to her, gentler. "We will get to the bottom of it. Not for revenge, but for a child who no longer has the opportunity to speak." Eva clasped her hands tightly. For the first time since Lucas's funeral, she didn't cry, but in her eyes, a fire had ignited, simmering but resolute. The morning was lightly sunny. Nathaniel stood in the backyard of a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, where he had arranged to meet a man that many years ago almost no one had paid attention to. Mateo, over 50 years old, skinny, slightly stooped, with the sun-tanned face of someone used to manual labor. His face was stern, but his eyes still had a quiet kindness. When Nathaniel approached, Mateo bowed his head slightly, both hesitant and urgent. "Sir wanted to meet me. What's wrong?" Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He took out a photo of Lucas. "Do you remember this boy?" Mateo looked at the picture. His face fell as if he had just touched a memory he didn't want to remember. He nodded slightly. "I remember. That's the child who used to follow Mrs. Miranda to the summer villa." Nathaniel sat down opposite him, his voice even and calm. "Tell me everything you know. I'm not here to blame anyone, just to find the truth for a child who can no longer speak." Mateo hesitated, but then his eyes gradually became more determined, as if he had kept this in his heart for too long. "At that time, I was a gardener for Miranda's villa, the house located near the mountains. A few times, they held private parties. Only a few close relatives came." He swallowed hard, remembering, "One afternoon, I was cutting the grass when I heard arguing from the outbuilding. I glanced through the crack in the door and saw Mrs. Miranda shouting loudly, her voice very harsh. Then I saw this boy, Lucas, standing next to the stairs, holding a school bag, his eyes red. The boy looked at her scared and said a sentence that I will never forget." Nathaniel leaned forward, his face tense. "What did he say?" Mateo looked at him, word by word. "I'll tell my mom. My mom will know everything." The air seemed to freeze. Nathaniel clasped his hands tightly. 3 days later, I was called to the management office. There was no clear reason, just no longer suitable. I worked there for 6 years, but I was fired in less than 10 minutes. No one gave me a chance to say goodbye. Nathaniel sat silently for a moment, then handed Mateo a glass of water. "Are you willing to testify about this? For Lucas, for Eva, the boy's mother?" Mateo looked at him, his eyes teary. "I have nothing in my life but pruning shears and a few old books. But if my words can help her know that her son didn't die in silence, then I will speak, even if I have to stand in court." Nathaniel nodded. "Thank you, Mateo. Not everyone is brave enough like you." Before leaving, Nathaniel asked for another detail. "Have you ever seen Miranda go down to the basement?" Mateo froze. Yes, once. Her hands were holding a small wooden box covered with white lace. I thought it was a party decoration, but her eyes at that time, no one looks at an object with those eyes. It's like hiding a part of her own soul. Meanwhile, Eva was cleaning up the notes, the loose documents that she and Sophia had gathered, when suddenly there was a sound of footsteps stopping in front of the rented room. A knock on the door, strong, decisive. She opened the door, and there was no mistaking it. It was Alonso. He was still the same, shirt ironed, hair neatly combed, strong smell of perfume. But his eyes were strange, cold, distant, and threatening. "What are you doing here?" Eva asked, clutching the doorframe. Alonso didn't answer immediately. He stepped in, looked around the room with contempt, then turned to look directly at Eva. "What kind of game are you playing?" Eva didn't avoid that look. "I'm finding out the truth about my son." Alonso smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "The past is something that should be left alone. The child is dead. Don't make things worse." "What are you afraid of?" Eva asked, her voice trembling but her eyes resolute. "Afraid I'll find out where you left him? Afraid I'll find out you let that woman into the house? Or afraid you left my son alone with her?" Alonso suddenly growled, stepping closer, his face no longer calm. "I'm telling you for the last time, Eva. If you don't stop, someone will pay a heavy price. Not just you." Eva stepped back, her eyes sparkling. But she didn't cry. Not this time. She just uttered in a breath, "Lucas has already paid the price." Alonso froze for a brief second. Then he pulled out his phone and threw it on the table. "Think carefully. You are facing people who never lose." And he left. Like a toxic wind passing through, leaving in Eva a real fear that she dared to name for the first time: loneliness and being hunted. That evening, Nathaniel returned to the rented room. Eva sat motionless on the chair, her eyes bewildered, her hands still on the phone Alonso left behind. "Are you okay?" he asked, entering like someone who was close. Eva didn't speak. But when Nathaniel approached, she reached out her hand. For the first time, she actively sought a grasp. "I was very scared. Scared they would hurt me. Scared no one would believe me. Scared to the point of wanting to give up." Her voice choked. Then tears began to roll. Not out loud, just a silent collapse. Nathaniel grasped her hand tightly, his voice full of certainty. "We will protect the truth, no matter what the cost." She looked up, looking at him through her tears, not searching for pity, but for a last foothold when everything around her was trying to drag her down to the depths of despair. "For Lucas," she said softly. Nathaniel nodded, resolutely. "For Lucas." That night, Eva didn't sleep. She opened the old drawer and took out a small, rusty iron key. Thomas's key. She held it up, looking at it for a long time. Lucas had mentioned the basement, strange light, the locked room. And Eva had never gone down there, not even once. Tomorrow, she would return. The old house. The basement door was still there. And the truth was waiting to be revealed. The morning at the city courthouse was no longer a place reserved for the powerful. Today, it became the place where a mother who had been abandoned, who had been buried by silence, stood up to ask for the voice of her son, a child who was only 10 years old. Thanks to Nathaniel's influence and his private team of lawyers, the order to reopen the investigation into Lucas Alexander's death was approved. Intervention from higher levels, coupled with new evidence, diaries, witness statements, and signs of legal violations in sealing the files, made it impossible to hide the matter any longer. At the forensic examination room, Dr. Emilia Ortega, who had been banned from accessing Lucas's file, was now sitting before the investigation board. On the large screen, images from the detailed autopsy of the boy's body were displayed. Everyone was silent. "This," Emilia pointed to the back of Lucas's head, her voice slow but clear, "is the main bruise leading to brain damage. But as you can see, the angle of impact and the shape of the wound are completely inconsistent with falling down the stairs." A murmur spread. "This injury is like it was caused by a hard object hitting directly at the head level of an adult." Nathaniel sat at the end of the row, his hands clenched. Eva was silent, her heart beating wildly, cold sweat beading on the back of her neck. It was no longer doubt. It was no longer a hunch. Lucas didn't die from an accident. That evening, at the Villaggio Hotel, where a large charity party was taking place, gathering the upper class, everything was still glamorous, as if a child had never been killed, in silence. Under the crystal chandeliers, in the sound of string music and raised champagne glasses, Miranda entered like the queen of the ball. Wearing an ivory white evening gown, her eyes swept across the hall, full of pride and without any fear. Until she met Eva. Eva was not wearing an elegant dress. She came in a simple black coat, her hair neatly tied, her eyes ice cold. But in those eyes was pain that had turned to steel. It was a mother who was no longer afraid of anything but the truth being forgotten. "Eva," Miranda smiled slightly, sipping her wine. "You haven't given up yet." "You used to say Lucas was a good boy," Eva replied. "So why did he tremble when he mentioned you in his diary?" Miranda laughed, a light laugh, full of irony. "You think the words of a 10-year-old child written in a notebook are evidence. I don't owe you anything. I don't need you to owe me." Eva stepped closer, looking directly into Miranda's eyes. "I just need you not to kill anyone else with silence." The air was as tense as a guitar string, and then, from across the hall, Matteo appeared. He was wearing a faded white shirt, his hands shaking as he held an old paper photo. "This," he said, his voice trembling but clear, "is a photo I took 7 months ago. Lucas, standing in front of Miranda's room at the villa." He held up the photo in the middle of the hall before dozens of eager and stunned eyes. In the picture, Lucas was huddled next to a dark wooden door. The boy's face wasn't smiling, only bewilderment. Next to it was a sign on the door. "Private room, no unauthorized entry." The entire party hall was silent. Miranda stood frozen. The glass of wine in her hand fell, shattered. At that moment, phone alarms rang throughout the hall, many people receiving the same notification. Special. Lucas Alexander's diary reveals suspicion of abuse before his death. Access the full version at eltiempo.net. It was Sophia. That small teacher, who had quietly kept Lucas's diary pages, had sent the entire content to a major newspaper. As the party took place, the article exploded on social media, with thousands of shares, outrage, and questions rushing in. One parent muttered, "Is this the sponsor of my child's school?" Another, "Oh my God. I used to let my child play with her." Miranda stepped back, her face pale, but still trying to force a smile. "It's all just fabrication. I have a lawyer. I don't—" But the MC interrupted her. He adjusted the microphone, saying softly, "Sorry, everyone. The party will be temporarily suspended. The police are requesting to meet with Mrs. Miranda Rios to clarify some information related to the death of baby Lucas Alexander." Silence. Then whispers spread like fire burning through the grass. Miranda was invited out. She turned to look at Eva, her eyes no longer arrogant, but empty, like someone who had just seen the first crack in the mask she had worn for so many years. After the party, Eva stood alone in the square. The cool night wind blew lightly over her shoulders. The headlights, the car horns, and the noises of the city today no longer made her feel small. Nathaniel came and stood next to her. He said nothing, just quietly handing her a printed newspaper. The front page was a photo of Lucas, and the large headline, "The voice of the boy who never got to speak, but now we have heard." Ava held the newspaper, her hand trembling slightly. Her eyes were teary, but it was the tears of the last days being swept away in humiliation, doubt, and fear. "Mum heard you, Lucas," she whispered. "Mum has heard your voice." Nathaniel put his hand on her shoulder. He also choked. No need to say more, because from today, the truth has spoken. A week after the explosive charity party, the city was no longer as peaceful as before. News about the Lucas Alexander case spread faster than anyone had expected. Every newspaper, TV news, social media, all repeated the same keywords: falsifying forensic files, inciting murder, concealing crimes, a child harmed by the silence of adults. In an office of the Department of Justice, lawyer Esteban Rios, who used to be the face representing a series of prestigious litigations, was now sitting behind the interrogation table. His face was pale, his hair matted with sweat, no longer the usual dignified look. The police presented evidence, an encrypted email that Esteban sent to the hospital side, requesting to temporarily hold the Lucas Alexander forensic file for sensitive family reasons, not to be released to the outside without instructions. But what was called sensitive had now turned its face. Included was also a recording of a leaked conversation. Esteban said to an unnamed person, "As long as this file disappears for a few years, the matter will cool down. That kid is no longer alive to talk." That statement, broadcast nationwide, ignited a formal criminal investigation. Esteban was charged with illegally interfering with forensic files, concealing evidence, and potential accomplice in the abuse of minors. Elsewhere, Miranda Rios, the woman who used to walk on the charity dance floor like a queen, was now walking into the investigation agency surrounded by the press. Her eyes were covered by large sunglasses, but she couldn't hide her awkward gait, her body curled up. Miranda's lawyer issued a statement. "My client is completely innocent. It's all a misunderstanding by the public and the press." But the truth was not easy to deny. Messages extracted from Alonso's old phone, the phone that Ava had been able to keep for a while, had been recovered. In it were many conversations between Alonso and Miranda surrounding the fact that Lucas is too sensitive. And if that boy continues like this, everything will fall apart. A message from Miranda made people shudder. "I can't stand the way he looks at me. He knows. He remembers. If she knows, everything will collapse." The police did not publicly accuse her of murder, but expanded the investigation with charges of inciting serious harm to minors, threatening and destroying evidence. Miranda was detained for investigation. As for Alonso, the man who used to be a familiar figure in family photos, now appeared before the public as a traitor. The television channel broadcast a special news report. Alonso Vega, husband, father, and accomplice in a plot to silence an innocent child. Reporters dug into financial records, anonymous transfers to Esteban, the sudden withdrawal of the child from international school just weeks before Lucas's death, and especially Alonso's name on a personal confidentiality agreement related to Miranda. The news was broadcast, everyone followed, and in a place few expected, an old woman sat collapsed in front of the TV screen. Doña Carlota, the one who had insulted Ava, who had scolded her for not keeping her child safe. Now, her eyes wide, trembled, unable to utter a word. Her lips moved when she saw Alonso handcuffed and led away. "No way! No way! That boy is my blood, she whispered, like someone out of her mind. Then she collapsed on the floor, no longer having the strength to defend the harsh words she had thrown at Eva. At the same time, Eva, after days of being covered by the media, public scrutiny, and the fear that had once held her in darkness, now stepped onto the stage at a special press conference organized by the city attorney's office. Flashes flashed continuously. Cameras turned to the small woman, her hair neatly tied, her face pale, but her eyes shining brightly. Eva, witness, mother, and survivor of the most brutal loss. She stepped up to the podium, holding the paper, but then folding it up. Her voice trembled with emotion, but was clear. My name is Eva. I am Lucas's mother. 3 months ago, my son died, in a death called an accident. She paused, taking a deep breath. But today, I can say what I only dared to cry in silence before, that my son was harmed, and that I will not be silent anymore. Hundreds of people were silent. A few sobs rang out. Some journalists shed tears. Eva continued, I don't say this for revenge. I say this so that every child, like Lucas, has the right to live, the right to be afraid, and the right to be protected. I say this so that those who have been silent will start to speak. She left the podium to thunderous applause. Nathaniel stood in the front row, his eyes red, unable to hide his pride. Matteo bowed his head. Sophia sobbed in the row next to him. The last photo captured the moment Eva held the framed photo of Lucas standing before the podium. Behind her the line, "Justice is not the price to be paid, but the truth spoken." The official trial opened in early June. The sky that day was clear and sunny, but in Eva's heart was a long, endless autumn. She didn't say much anymore. She didn't need to. The truth had been revealed. Lucas's name had been heard. Each person in that chain of lies had been and was facing the court, justice, conscience, and public opinion. Immediately after the first trial, Eva asked to leave the city, not to escape, but to breathe. The city where every street corner was a painful memory, every stretch of road a knife wound to the heart. She knew she needed to live, not to continue struggling, not to run away, but to live. Nathaniel understood that more than anyone. He quietly arranged everything. Then, one early morning, woke Eva with a simple sentence, "I want to take you somewhere." The car glided on the village road shaded by trees. No one in the car said anything for 2 hours, but no one felt the need to speak. The silence between them was not a void, but a space to listen, to think, to heal. Finally, the car stopped in front of an old wooden gate. The paint faded. Nathaniel got out first, opening the gate. Inside was a small white house, red-tiled roof, pots of purple flowers planted along the porch, and a wooden swing hanging silently under an old apple tree. Eva got out of the car. The wind here was light and smelled of damp earth. Everything was so peaceful that she felt like she was standing in a completely different world. Nathaniel turned back, looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "This used to be my son's house. Elliot. We bought it when he was 5 years old. After he died, I locked the door. No one was allowed in. I thought I would never come back here." Eva looked at the house, her hands slightly clenching. "Why, did you bring me here?" Nathaniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Because I believe what once belonged to a good child should continue to belong to a mother brave enough to live for her child. This house, if you want, it's yours." Eva was speechless. She couldn't say a word. Her throat tightened, her heart heavy, but no longer in pain, but in something very gentle, very human. "No one has ever given me anything," she said after a moment, her voice trembling. "No one has ever seen me worthy enough to keep anything." Nathaniel stepped forward, not touching her, but his voice was so warm that Eva felt like she was being embraced. "We have all lost, but if we only live in memories, we also disappear with the people we love. You don't have to be grateful. You don't have to take on anything for me either. I don't give you this house as a debt, but as a message that life, however fragile, can still begin again." Eva nodded. Tears fell, but this time it was gentle. The early days in the White House were unlike anything Eva had ever experienced. Each morning, she made coffee for both of them. Nathaniel would mow the lawn in the yard, replanting the old vegetable patches. They didn't talk about Miranda, about Alonzo, about the trial, or the media. Everything receded behind that wooden gate. In the kitchen were traces that Elliot had left behind. Heights marked on the door frame, some old stamps pressed in books, a small photo on the desk. Elliot was smiling, holding a basketball almost as big as him. Eva didn't touch them, but every time she passed by, she placed a wildflower in front of the photo, like she used to do with Lucas. Nathaniel saw it, but didn't ask. He understood. No one replaced anyone, but pain could touch each other and heal each other. One day, when it was raining lightly, Eva sat at the small wooden table on the porch. She wrote, not writing to accuse, but to keep. She wrote about Lucas, about his laughter, about the things he used to say, about how the boy jumped up every time he saw dandelions, about the look in his eyes the last time he looked at her. Not angry, not afraid, just believing that Mom would know everything. Nathaniel watched her write and understood that. The mother had returned, not as before, but a new mother who had gone through hell and still had enough faith to come out. One early autumn morning, sunlight slanted through the small window of the bakery located at the top of the hill, where the white house and the old apple tree were. The wooden sign hanging in front had a handwritten inscription, Pan y luz, bread and light, for those who need a place to start over. Eva stood behind the counter, gently kneading dough, her hair neatly tied, her apron stained with a few white flour marks. Those hands had once trembled with pain, had clutched the framed photo of Lucas on sleepless nights. Now, they were making bread, soft, fragrant loaves full of kindness. The bakery was Eva's small dream. But it didn't come from her alone. Carmen, the old owner of the village restaurant, was the first to offer a helping hand when she learned that Eva had moved in. She cleared the old kitchen next to the restaurant, giving up a corner of the refrigerator, and said, "You need to do something with your own hands, not to forget, but to remember, but still be able to live." And Eva had started from there. Every morning, Mateo, the silver-haired gardener, would stop by early, carrying a basket of vegetables, flowers, and herbs from the backyard garden. He took care of the garden around Eva's house, resetting each stone, trimming each lavender bush. When he wasn't busy with his hands, he would sit at the bakery counter, sipping coffee and chatting with students after school. They all called him Mr. Mateo the storyteller, because he always had a small, gentle story, ending with a warm sentence. Once, he told a boy who had just moved back to the village. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Lucas. He liked dandelions. That boy taught us that. No matter where you are, if you tell the truth, you will make even the adults listen. At the beginning of the week, a young woman stepped off the village bus. Black hair, neat shirt, bright eyes. Sophia, Lucas's old teacher, had decided to move back to the village after many sleepless nights. In the city, I taught to live. But here, I want to live to teach. she became an elementary school teacher at the village school. Every morning, she biked past the bakery, took a small croissant, and greeted, "For the teacher who needs a lot of energy today." Eva always smiled back. "Are there any courage-filled pastries left? Someone needs one." Occasionally on weekends, Sophia would bring the children to Eva's backyard to hold an outdoor class. They sat in a circle on the lawn, drawing dream houses, writing a few lines of poetry for someone who used to be sad. Eva often stood in the kitchen, looking out the window, smiling when she saw the children chirping. Once, she received a drawing from a first-grade girl. "Mrs. Eva is a baker with a singing heart." She laughed, then gently wiped away tears. One late afternoon, when a cool wind swept through the porch, Nathaniel, Eva, and Matteo sat at the wooden table drinking herbal tea. On the table was a freshly baked chestnut cake and a small notebook Eva had just started writing, recording stories from the bakery's visitors. "I want to print it," Eva said, her eyes sparkling, "not to sell, but to give away. As a message, anyone can start again with whatever they have." Nathaniel looked at her. His face was still stern, but his eyes seemed to quiet, full of emotion. He thought about Elliot, about Lucas, and he saw those children were living again in a different way, through the cakes, the letters, and the simple stories. One day, Nathaniel stopped by the bakery and placed a notice on the counter. "Lucas's Light Fund for children who need protection, legal funding, psychological treatment, media for cases of harm to children. No voice deserves to be forgotten." Eva looked at the paper, her hand gently touching the corner printed with Lucas's name. Nathaniel said, "The fund will be based here. No need to be grand. Just need someone to listen." She nodded, not speaking, but her eyes sparkled. He was no longer a stranger. No need to call him by titles. Nathaniel was a support, the one who kept his promise, the father of a child who had also gone too soon. And now, he was giving back the legacy of that love, not with money, but with the belief that every child has the right to live with light. One autumn afternoon, leaves fell all over the road leading to the cemetery. Eva wore a grey coat, holding a bouquet of dried dandelions pressed in a notebook from many weeks before. She walked, not hurrying, not avoiding. Lucas's grave was under a young oak tree, a tree that Matteo had planted from the very seeds that Eva had brought on the first anniversary. On the headstone was added the line, "Lucas Alexander." "You made the whole world listen." Eva knelt down, gently stroking the headstone. No more tears, no more trembling, only peace. "Can you see, Lucas?" she whispered, her voice light as the wind. "Mum made the cakes you used to like. Some children eat them and smile. Mum told your story, and Mum survived, not to forget you, but to speak for you." The wind blew gently, blowing a few dandelion seeds up. She looked up at them, and then the first smile in many months appeared on Eva's lips, light, small, but real. From afar, under the tree, Father Samuel, the old priest from the city, stood quietly watching. He didn't come closer. He just nodded slightly, as if confirming what he had always believed. Eva's journey had reached the final stage, not an end, but a different beginning, profound, kind, and vibrant. That afternoon, at the bakery, many customers visited. Children ran and played in the yard. Parents talked over cups of coffee. Sophia taught the children to fold origami from scrap paper. Matteo was telling a story to a little girl who had just lost her father. Eva stood behind the counter, wiped her hands, and looked up at everything. Not a miracle. No one was resurrected. But in this place, with flour, light, and people who had been hurt, a bridge of healing had been built, slowly and steadily. from darkness to light, from loss to sharing, from crying to a smile. The city court read the verdict on a midwinter morning. There was no snow, but the sky was grey and silent, as if keeping the final dignity for a truth that had come to an end. Miranda Rios, the woman who used to walk the red carpet, who used to smile in charity pictures, was sentenced to 12 years in prison for the crimes of inciting harm to minors, concealing evidence, and threatening witnesses. There were no tears when the verdict was announced. Miranda didn't scream. She just stood there, silent, her eyes no longer angry, but empty, as if she also understood that everything she had tried to cover up was no longer hers. In the courtroom, Nathaniel clasped Eva's hand tightly. Both didn't speak. They didn't need to. The excuses, justifications, or anger all had been packaged behind them. Before them, only clarity remained. On the same day, the National Bar Association officially issued a decision. Esteban Rios was permanently disbarred. The one who used to represent the powerful now sat in a small office. No more nameplates, no more invitations from the media. He only had the silence of a name that had lost all value. As for Alonso, he was not criminally prosecuted. The law could not convict cowardice, but public opinion could. His family refused contact. Friends cut ties. Old partners didn't mention his name anymore. People avoided looking at him in the supermarket, in the coffee shop, as if he was a stain, not because of what he did, but because of what he had not dared to do: protect his own child. Alonso withdrew from all social activities. The luxurious apartment he used to live in was now just an empty shell without light. Sometimes people would catch him sitting alone on the balcony, his eyes looking into the void that no one answered. The cold shoulder did not kill, but it made people understand the value of what had been lost. Too late. Returning to the small village, in the white house with the red tiled roof, winter was not as cold as in previous years. Ava was cleaning the bookshelf in the attic, the room she had just decided to turn into a reading and writing corner for guests to the bakery. The skylight let in soft light. The smell of cinnamon cookies spread from the kitchen downstairs, warm like the smell of memories. On the table were a few books Lucas used to like: children's stories, coloring books, and the small notebook where he used to write about things I want to ask Mom but I'm shy. While rearranging an old tin box, which used to belong to Elliot, Ava accidentally discovered a small envelope clipped under a photo album. The paper had yellowed, but the writing was still clear, Nathaniel's handwriting. On the envelope was written, "To Eva, when you are ready to smile." Her hand trembled slightly. She slowly sat down and opened it. My son once said a sentence after we lost our first little dog. I used to think it was a naive word, but many years later I understood that it was a truth that only children could see clearly. If someone is still crying for you, then you have never really disappeared. Thank you, Ava, for keeping that light for Lucas, and for yourself. This house is yours, not because I want to help, but because I believe that those who are brave enough to love also deserve a place to belong. If one day the light in you dims, remember, it always starts again from another candle. Nathaniel. Eva folded the letter, her hand placed on her chest, her heart beating lightly, but full. The letter was not long, but it was like someone had just put a hand on her shoulder, steady and kind, saying, "You're on the right track." She sat still for a long time, looking out the window. The children in the village were playing in the yard, the sounds of laughter echoing in each wave. A little girl fell, burst into tears, but immediately 3 small arms reached out to help her up. She smiled, lightly and truly. That afternoon, Ava put on a grey wool coat and stepped out onto the porch, the smell of dry leaves, the smell of firewood from the surrounding houses, and the smell of honey cake from the kitchen blended together into a scent that was very stay. On the stone path leading to the village playground, the last remaining dandelions of the season still flew in the wind. A little boy waved, "Mrs. Eva, look at me kick the ball." She laughed, waving back. A father nearby turned to her, nodding his thanks for the cake he had received on the day his first child was born. Lucas did not return, but he never disappeared. He was here, in the light, in the warmth, in every cake that people took home, in every letter Eva wrote, and in everything kind that people started again after a pain. She stood silently in the afternoon sun, her eyes closed slightly as if to record this moment. And for the first time in her life, Eva didn't feel like she was missing anything anymore. That spring came earlier than usual. The sky was not harsh, the sun was just enough to make wool sweaters unnecessary after noon. Eva opened the bakery earlier than usual. On the wooden sign outside the porch, she wrote in white chalk the sloping words, "Today, give extra cake to anyone who knows how to tell a beautiful story." Not for any special occasion, just because she wanted to, because her heart was bright. Because last night, she dreamed of Lucas smiling. Nathaniel arrived at 9 o'clock, earlier than usual. He was not wearing a coat, but only a light grey cardigan, carrying a basket of lavender he had just cut. She saw him from afar and stepped out to greet him. "Today, you seem sunnier than usual," Eva joked lightly. Nathaniel smiled faintly, placing the basket of flowers on the wooden table on the porch. "Isn't that because of someone making cinnamon cakes that smell all the way to the gate?" Both sat down. The tea was still hot, the cake was fresh from the oven, the smell of honey spreading in the wind. No one said anything for a few minutes. It wasn't necessary. Then Nathaniel spoke, his voice even as always, but this time carrying something very strange. "Mrs. Eva, I have something I have never told you. About Elliot." Eva put down her cup of tea, her eyes looking at him expectantly. "The day he died, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't in pain, but because I thought I wasn't allowed to. I'm a father. I have to stand firm. I have to take care of the funeral, answer the police, keep my wife from going crazy with that pain." He paused, looking out at the garden where Matteo was trimming the jasmine bush. His voice lowered. "But it was the not allowing myself to be weak that made me unable to touch that pain, and it turned to stone in me for almost 10 years. Eva was silent. She understood that feeling, when the heart was still beating, but could no longer hear itself. "Until I saw you, in the cemetery," Nathaniel continued. "The way you knelt, hugging the picture, not screaming, not writhing, but the pain emanated from every breath. And I understood. You didn't run. You endured it. You lived with it." Eva leaned forward slightly, not interrupting. Nathaniel turned to look at her. "You showed me something that Elliot didn't have time to teach. That love is not being in pain, but daring to be in pain and still choosing to continue living. Not resenting, not abandoning yourself." She smiled lightly, her hands clasped around the warm cup of tea. "You taught me the opposite," Eva said, "that I don't have to carry the burden alone, that I can cry and still be listened to. I can fall and still have someone to support me." They said nothing more. The tea cooled, but the heart was full. That afternoon, both went to the field behind the village, where the large oak tree that Nathaniel had mentioned was the tree Elliot planted when he was 7 years old. Eva brought a small wooden swing, Matteo made from recycled wood behind the house. Both installed it on the lowest branch. No children sat on it that afternoon. Only Eva and Nathaniel sat at either end of the chair, swaying gently. She said, "Maybe one day I will tell some child the story of Lucas, of Elliot, of a father who used to be afraid to cry, and a mother who used to not know how to get up." Nathaniel replied, "And don't forget to mention about two old friends who rebuilt a swing." She laughed. This time the laughter was out loud, comfortable, not choked, because it was a day without darkness. And the story of Eva, Lucas, and Nathaniel, like the light shining through the crack in the narrow door, is not a tragedy told to mourn, but a reminder that sometimes the truth is not in the scream, but in the forgotten whispers. A child's diary, a silent bouquet, someone willing to believe. Perhaps you, the one listening to this video, have experienced loss, have had your voice denied by others, or have thought that kindness is a luxury in a world that is too noisy. But if there is one thing that this journey can convey, it is silent kindness, when it goes to the end, can still shake the darkness. We cannot change what has been lost, but we can choose not to let anyone else suffer in silence anymore. We can be the one who stops, to ask a question, to place a branch of flowers, or just to listen to someone who has never been heard. Thank you for staying until the very end, especially those aunts, uncles, sisters, those who may have also been mothers, have lost something very precious that no one understood. I hope that this story does not make your heart heavier, but warmer, because at least we know. In this world, there are still people willing to go with you to the end of pain. If your heart is tired today, please rest a little, drink a warm cup of tea, listen to an old song again. And remember, you are not alone. I am always here, telling stories not to be heard, but so that you feel companionship. I wish you a light day and a very peaceful night.